Alright, I'm just going to solve a problem real quick from this document that I have, and hopefully by doing it in a browser you'll be able to see if I need to look anything up or anything like that. Actually, I'm just going to leave it another thing. So I'm going to do this Excel sheet, spreadsheet thing. Number one, how would you represent a spreadsheet data in a simple program? And the way that I would do that is, I'm just going to use Ruby for this. By using a two-dimensional array. So this is obviously, how I would do that. The more complicated component of the question is doing this kind of a thing. And once we're kind of entering that zone, then I'm gonna go straight to making a class spreadsheet. And then I'm going to set up the data that's in there, and it's just going to be a single array. And get rid of that for now. And then in here it's asking to a get and a set cell functions. So we're going to define a get cell and define a set cell value. And so then just continuing the setup, we'll initialize one thing from just initialize an instance of the spreadsheet class, and then do a couple things like sheet.set a1 69, and then do a puts sheet get a1. And so right now when I run it, obviously nothing's going to happen. It'll just output nil or something, or nothing. But if I do like a dot inspect, then you'll see that it's really returning nil. Yeah. So now we can fill these in. REPL ran out of resources. All right, that's fine. So in here, we'll start with set cell. And I think one of the easiest way to do this is to just use a hash, basically. And so we'll do data cell equals value, and we can look at the structure of that in just a second. And then for get, we'll just do data cell. So now when we run it, we should see 69. Yep. And so the way that this data is going to look in here, when we call this, it's going to look like, usually they complete comments right away for new lines, but it'll look like this approximately, because it's just going to store it with this as a key. So it's not using it as a grid right now, but I think that's a sufficient way to implement number 2 here. And we can look at that a little bit too. So for example, we can inspect the data from inside the class, even though it's a private, instance variable in there. We can do sheet.instance variable get data, and we can inspect that. So let's comment that out real quick. And undefined method instance. Oh, it's because I randomly capitalized it. I don't really know how that happened. But yeah, so as you can see, that's the structure of the data that's being stored. And then let's move on to the third thing. And this is the most complicated one. This one, I think, it's actually going to depend on having a grid for this. So one of the things that we're going to need to do is update our work so far to support a grid. So the way that we're going to do that is by changing this to an array. like we had originally, just the two-dimensional array is what we'll end up using. And if we're using a two-dimensional array, one of the things to take into consideration is that this notation needs to somehow be converted into a essentially like an x and a y coordinate. So we can do that by creating a method. We'll call it convert cell, and then we'll just pass it a cell. And then what it's going to do is the format of cells is x, I guess y is represented as letters, and x is represented as numbers. So we can use a regular expression to do that because we know the format's always going to be like that. So we'll do essentially A through Z, and then you can have more than one of those. And then in the next capture group we'll do I don't think you ever do zeros, but we'll do 1 through 9. I guess you do zeros, just not initially, and we can work through that, and we might not even need to bother with that. That sounds like a detail that I don't really care much about. So once we call scan like this, we can set it to a variable, and instead of scan, I'm actually gonna call match, and MD stands for match data. And the difference between match and scan is that match is just gonna look for the first instance of this regular expression. It's just gonna match it once, whereas scan is gonna see if it repeats itself at all. So, and then we'll look at what the match data represents. So that way we can kind of work step by step through it. So here we go, sheet dot convert cell A1, and that's ideally going to show us, what's it going to show us? It should show us a separate, I'm a little confused about why I did that, but let's see here. Yeah, so we see that the first capture group contains A and the second capture group contains 1. So the way that we're gonna work through this is obviously the 1 is fine, that can be its own thing, and so we know that X is gonna be MD2, and we know that Y is going to be MD1, but we need to do a little bit of work on that. So that's a character, and we need to, the way that you go from a character to a number, for example, so if we have the character A, I think .ord, wordy, is going to, oh, this is a bash console, this is not a Ruby thing. Console, I think there's a way to, yeah, I think console is what I want. Or maybe shell? No, it's not shell. I see, so maybe I just type in IRB. Yeah, okay, here we go. So if I have capital A and I do .ord, it'll tell me 65. So that's how we know that A is 65, and the way that we can go from any letter to a number is essentially subtracting. So because so B, for example, capital B is going to be 66. So if we want A to mean 0 and B to mean 1, then all we really have to do is take B .ord and subtract A .ord, and ord stands for ordinal, and we'll get a 1. So this right here for Y, or rather for X, we'll do A.ord minus this .ord. And so far this is only going to work for up to 26, and we can kind of leave it at that. There's a slightly more involved thing you'd have to do for supporting things like Excel does, like AA, AP, AC, whatever else, after you run out of room. But we're not going to focus on that right now because that's not really the most important part of the exercise. And we'll just validate our results here. And for the purposes of building with arrays, we're going to subtract 1 from y as well, because we don't really start at a0. We want a1 to mean the very first thing. So we should see 0, 0 here. Instead we see this, because the string, this is actually a string, so we need to convert it to an integer first. So now it should be correct. 16 and -1. It's not what we wanted. And I think, maybe I have, so maybe this needs to be 1 and 0. I think that's actually offset incorrectly. 0 and -1. Let's take a look at why that's happening. MD0, MD1, MD2. Just for good measure, see what those actually are. I think I might be wrong. So we need 1 and 2. So this is 1, that's correct, and this is 2. I just had them backwards. Alright, that should work now. We should see 0, 0. And then when we do B13, that should be 1, 12. Somehow it's -1, 12, but that's because we got this backwards. So, as you can see, there's a lot of little things you just gotta keep track of and fix one by one. So now we're gonna see 112, test it on G6. So that should be whatever G is, and then 5, 6. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G. G is the 7th letter, 0 indexed, 6. That's correct. So now we can return X, Y from here. So now when we have this, we, instead of calling it like this, we'll say X, Y equals convert cell. So we'll get a coordinate for it, and we can mark this method as private. And this keyword just means that everything below it is a private method that you couldn't call like this. So if I run this program right now, it's going to say that you're trying to call a private method. It doesn't like that. On top of that, it also doesn't like some other thing that I'm doing. I think it doesn't like how I'm returning this. You might have to do this as an array. Yeah. So if you do it as an array, then it won't complain. Yeah, so it's saying private method called. You can't do that, but you can't call it from inside the class. So this will work. So now we'll do X, Y, and this might not work either. And we'll take a look at why that's the case in a second here. Oh, I never actually called it. So we'll uncomment these guys, give that a run, and see that that's not going to work either. And the reason that's not going to work is that this is a single dimensional array and it doesn't have anything in it yet. So we're going to need to do a check. So we're going to do if data at x is nil, then we're going to do data x equals a new array, and that's all we're going to do. So now when we run it, no implicit conversion of string into integer on 37. Oh, it doesn't, the get is what's throwing it off right now. We're not going to run that yet because we haven't even implemented it yet. So now that works, and we can inspect our private data variable as well and see what the structure of that data looks like. So as you can see, A100 is set to 69. But what if we change this to A12, for example? What's Ruby gonna do? And every language is kind of different. Ruby is nice because it'll actually insert 11 nil values or 10 nil values for you in there, so that this can be the 11th element. So 2D array has an internal data structure there. wrong. To implement the get, all we really need to do is once again find an XY coordinate for the cell, and then we're going to go XY. So get the inner array, and then from the inner array get the element we want. So now when we run it, we should see that it returns, oops, that's not what that method is called. When it returns convert cell. So there we go, it returned nil. That's not what we expected. So let's take a look at, oh no, that is what we expected, because we set A12, not A1. So if we get A12 now, then we should see 69 appear. And we do, so we know that we're doing this correctly. So now that we've changed the structure to internally be represented as this 2x2 array, we can start looking at this. How would you implement the sum function? And one of the things to look at here is in Excel, if you're familiar, a function always, or like a computed value always starts with an equal sign. So that gives us a hint about what's going on here. So the way that I want to do it is, we'll set the value however we set it. So like if we set, let's just put a couple things in there so that we can check our work. So we'll do A1 is 2, we'll do A2 is 4, and A3 is 6. And so we'll set B1 to equals sum A1 B A3. Okay. So then when we get B1, we're going to want to see the number 12. Right now, we're not going to see that. We're just going to see this string exactly the way that it is. And that is because we haven't implemented anything. So when it's set like this, I don't want the internal structure of the data to change at all. Like I want this to actually be the same internally. Just when you get it, if there's some computation needed, it'll compute it. And actual Excel, caches the value and does all sorts of trickery with it to make it fast. So we'll get the value here, and then we'll return it that way. So one of the things we're going to do now is we're going to see if the value starts with an equals, and I don't remember what the method name is. We can kind of see what that is experimentally here. Start with. Okay, so it's not starts with, it's start with, and it is a question mark. So if the value starts with an equal sign, then we want to do something special. And we'll get to that in a sec. And if it doesn't start with an equal sign, then we'll just return value. In Ruby, you don't have to use the return keyword. You can just, the last thing that's evaluated is what the method returns. So if it starts with an equal sign, then we're going to want to, we'll define another private method in here, and we'll call it computed value. And so we'll just return computed value of whatever this is. So computed value, and we have the value here, and in here we will do a little more regular expression kind of work. So we'll do the same kind of format here, and we'll do value.match. And essentially the way that this is going to work, and this is pretty oversimplified, we'll match on So there's going to be an equal sign, then there's going to be and we'll capture the name of the method. So we'll do dot plus question mark, and then there will be a parenthesis, and then there will be arguments which we will capture in another capture group, essentially. So we have that, and then close parenthesis, and I think that's actually it. And we'll just inspect what it is to see if we're capturing things correctly. So matching the string 1, function name sum, and this is the arguments A1 to A3. So we're gonna kind of want to see if this works. We'll call it function args and see if that actually works. I have a feeling this is not going to work, but sometimes, yeah, no, that was the correct impulse. So we'll see if maybe this will work. Converting it to an array to a is usually what that means. So yeah, now we get sum and we get nil. So we actually are missing one. So we'll just do a throwaway variable, call it underscore, because there's 3 things. So yeah, go sum and A3. So now we're going to do case statement, which is like a switch in every other language. And based on what the function is, we're going to so when sum and then we'll do an else, and in the else we'll just throw an error. So when sum, we're going to want to get the args ready for, and to do that we're going to need to, we know that it's separated by a colon there, so we'll do basically the start and the stop cell, the cell that you start at, the cell that you stop at, and we'll set that equal to args.split on the colon. And split just takes a string, and when it encounters a character that you pass into it, it just uses that as a separator for an array, basically. So it'll return an array with a start and a stop. And then we're going to want to also get this to be converted into the format that we like. So go like that. We'll not have that so for now, and then here we can just inspect start.inspect, put stop.inspect, and hopefully we should see the right kind of stuff in there. So it starts at 0, 0, stops at 0, 2. Okay, so there's kind of two ways that, I guess 3 ways that sum works. You can sum a column, you can sum a row, or you can sum a column, like just a block. So if you started at like A1 and stopped at D5, that would be a square. And I think we'll just pretend like they're always kind of got that square shape rather than just a column or a row, because that should work for any kind of thing. So basically what we do is we grab, let's think about this. So if we start at an X, so basically we want to get every cell in between, and the way that we're going to do that is we're going to get an X start and an X stop. It's going to be, and we're going to get a Y start and a Y stop. And then we're going to go through basically all the iterations of this. So we're going to go from x start up to x stop, and then at the same time we're going to go from y start up to y stop. And this isn't the cleanest way to do it, but it's important to approach problems from a perspective of like, I'm going to solve the problem and then I'm going to iterate on my solution to get it to be better. And you know, sometimes even your first solution that you might not think is quite so elegant ends up being quite nice by the time you're done. So we'll create an array of just values, and that's where we're going to accumulate all the values that we're going to be summing up. So we're just going to call the get method, and well, it'd be nice if the get method didn't only do that, but that's okay. We don't need to call any method. We'll just do data x, y, and we will put that into values. This operator just adds a value to an array. And so now we'll just take a look at what value stores. We are expecting value to store 3 things, but it might not work correctly the first time, or it might work the first time. So that's just fine. Ruby has a really handy method called sum. So you can, once you've collected all the data that you want to sum, we'll just return them directly. There we go. So we see 12, just like we expected, because 2 plus 4 plus 6 is 12. So now let's see if this works for a slightly more complicated thing. As I mentioned, there's kind of 3 modes that we expect this to be working in. So let's do B1 is 3, B2 is 6, and B3 is 9. And then we'll set C1 to sum A1 to B3. And that should be 12 plus 15 plus 3, 18. So 12 plus 18, 30, I guess. So we should expect when we get C1 for it to equal 30. And it does. So that looks like we've completed the assignment, the question. That's really, I mean, there's a lot further that you can go with this. I suppose you could implement other functions like average, you know, product, whatever. But we're just going to stop here. Hopefully that all made sense and is useful. Alrighty, that's it.